In this tutorial, we're going to learn to make the ombre-dyed sweater that you see on the mannequin behind me. And this is an exciting tutorial. There are 3 new things going on with this one. First, this is the first time I'm releasing a women's sweater that is pieced and seamed, meaning that it's knit in 5 different pieces and seamed together. The other tutorials that I have out right now are all top-down raglans and knit in 1 piece. So it's a very different construction, a different look, as you can see, because it's more structured and more tailored because the seams actually provide a lot of structure in the sweater. The second exciting thing is I've never seen this in the hand knitting world before, but we're going to knit this sweater in bare undyed sock yarn like this, knit it, seam it, finish it, and then dye it as a completed garment. Garment dyeing, I've heard of that in the textile industry, but never in hand knitting before. So that's very exciting. And then the wee part of that dyeing thing is the second part of this video. We're going on location to White Bear Fiber Studios with my friend Doug Upchurch. He's a dyeing expert and he will show us how to get this ombre effect with the dye so that you can dye your own sweater at home. Now, of course, you can make this sweater out of sock yarn that isn't bare, that is already dyed. This is just kind of an interesting thing to throw in the mix. I've listed this sweater as intermediate. I don't really recommend this pattern for someone who's a beginner unless you're a really confident and brave beginner. When I say intermediate, I mean you're very comfortable with the basics like casting on, knitting, purling, basic decreases, and some experience with pattern reading would be very helpful too. Now I say intermediate, the pieces of the sweater are really pretty simple to knit. The most complicated part's going to be the seaming, which we're going to cover in the tutorial. I'm actually not going to cover the knitting part in the tutorial because it is that simple and an intermediate knitter should be able to get through the pattern pretty easily. I will say that when you get your pattern, there's information on sizing and everything in the pattern. Go through and circle or highlight the instructions for your size, so when you're knitting through, it's easy to see and you don't get confused. This pattern is sized from extra small to 3XL, so there are a lot of extra numbers in there you won't be using for your size, so definitely circle your size. If you would like to get your own copy of this pattern and follow along, you can just click the link below the video in the video description field. That will whisk you off to my website where you can purchase and instantly download your pattern. And that my website also gives you all the information you need about the yarn and the needles and everything else. So next up, we're going to talk about the sweater pieces and get started with seaming. If you've made it this far, hopefully you had an easy time knitting up the pieces of the sweater. Of course, if you're working through the pattern, you can always drop me a note if you have any questions. And you'll end up with these, this is a sleeve, you'll end up with these pieces that need to be seamed together, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. Let's take a look at little paper cutouts of what the pieces look like. Okay, I've done these paper cutouts like this because we'd really have to pull the camera out to a wide zoom to be able to show the actual pieces and how big they are. Now I've listed these as right front, back, left front, and I have sleeve 1 and 2. The sleeves are identical to each other. This being the shoulder seam, this being the armhole, and the bottom cuff. I mean, if you understand anything about sewing or patterns, you can see how this would fit a body. There is one unique thing. Normally you would see a seamed sweater that would stop right here and wouldn't have this little extra piece. I put this extra piece in to add a little height to the neckline and a little draping in the front. I'm going to show you how that goes. The first thing that you will seam is the shoulder seams, and to do that you'll put the either one of the fronts together with the back and just seam, make sure I'm in the center, seam this little part right here. And then of course you'll do the same thing to the other one, seam the little part right here, leaving this open. These paper cutouts are not to scale, but it'll give you the idea. So when you have this piece left over, you will fold it around and seam it to the back of the neck like that. And then this half will meet with this half here, and you'll seam those together. Let me show you this way, seam those together. So one more time with this front, you seam this little bit here, the shoulders come first, you seam this, and then the neck part here you fold around and seam that way, and it'll meet up with the right front neckline. Okay, after you do that, you're going to ease in the sleeves, and I can't really demonstrate that with paper, it's way too three-dimensional. But we're going to cover that in the next part of the video. It deserves its own part. So you seam the shoulders, you ease in the sleeves. The shoulders just give you some structure to ease in the sleeves. It's what we say when we seam shoulders, easing it in. And then you will have a sweater that's mostly put together, and you can do one long seam from the cuff of the sleeve all the way down to the bottom of the sweater. So that's the order in seaming. Shoulders, sleeves, and then the one long sleeve under the arm and down the sides. And you'll do that, of course, on each side. Now let's talk about the different things you'll see when you're seaming. When you're seaming the shoulders, you're going to be seaming bind off to bind off, which is very simple. When you're seaming the whole long side right here, you're going to be seaming rows to rows, which is also very simple. The most complicated part of this is seaming the sleeve in. We're going to go over the easiest parts first, and the next part of the video we'll talk about easing in the sleeves. Okay, let me move my happy little paper cutouts. I'm going to use these giant chunky pieces. Of course, you're going to be working with sock yarn, which will be quite different than these giant chunky pieces, but I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So the shoulder seam is going to be bind off to bind off, and it's going to look something like this. Let's do it this way. These pieces are not the same size. Your work won't look like this. I actually like to work bind off to bind off this way. I'm going to use a different color of chunky yarn so you can see what I'm doing. And what you have the V's coming up this way and the V's coming up this way, bind off, or the bind off to bind off this way. First thing I do is I'll attach the yarn in the very, very corner and leave myself a 6-inch tail to weave in later. Now, if you're a smarty pants, you might think ahead and leave yourself really long tails so that you can seam without attaching new yarn. I always find they get caught up in my work and I get them tangled, and I just prefer to weave in more ends than deal with that. So what I did is I went through once and I went through the same hole again, and we're secure over here. And then I'm going to go into the very edge over here. Now this is stockinette, so it's going to curl. So you always want to uncurl it all the way so you can see what your very edge stitch is. I'm going to skip that very edge stitch and go through both legs of the V coming up this way, the next one. Okay, over here I unroll it, skip that very edge stitch, and go through both legs of the V on this side. Jump back over here, go into the same hole I came out of last time, pick up both legs of the V on this side, jump back over here, going back into the same hole I came out of, pick up both legs of the V on this side. I think this is pretty fun. I like this seaming business. Of course, when I did this at home with the sweater, it's much more careful work than what I'm doing here because this is so chunky and easy to see with a different color yarn too. Couple reasons I don't pull this tight as I'm doing it. For one, it's easy to see where I came out of last time so I can go back in. And two, I love this part. I love leaving a whole bunch of it and then pulling it tight all at once because that is awesome. Look how good that looks. That is shoulder to shoulder. Okay, let me undo this because I'm going to show you what it's like from side to side. Or rows to rows, I guess we would call it. Let me make sure I have this right. There we go. Okay, when you're seaming up the side seams of the sweater and under the arms, your V's are going to go this way. They're going to match up and you're going to be seaming this way. So it's a little bit different. I mean, it's the same thing. You're going in the same hole you came out of every time. You attach the yarn just the same. It's just where we pick up that's different. So again, this is stockinette, and it's going to roll. So I'm going to unroll it so I can see the very edge column of stitches. I'm going to skip that column and look between the first and second column. And for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to really stretch this out so you can see the ladders. You do not have to do this with your sweater. The ladders will be there, I promise. So between the first column and the second column, I have these ladders that appear. And what I want to do is grab the bottom two ladders. Something important when you're seaming that just happened to me, you want to use a blunt-ended needle because you don't want to split the stitches as you go through. And I just split a stitch right there, so I pulled my needle out. So I'm never poking through to the back. I have right sides facing. I go under both legs of the ladder over here, jump over to this side, I do the same thing. I uncurl the stockinette between the first column and the second column of stitches. I grab the bottom two ladders over here. Okay, now we're attached. I go in the same hole I came out of, grab two ladders, pull that through, go into the same hole I came out of, go under two ladders. You can see this is a lot like seaming the bind off to bind off. We're just grabbing from in a different place. Okay, again, I leave it loose for usually a couple of inches. I'll pull it tight every couple of inches. Now let me do this. Okay, now we get the magic moment of seeing how cool this looks when it's done. And there we go. Our side seams are going to be perfect. You can't even tell. Okay, one thing I want to show you, two things I want to show you with seaming. I have to show you on one of the knitted pieces here on the sleeves. The first one is, you see these colored bits of sock yarn on the sides of this sleeve. I put those in as I was knitting it. I knit a couple of inches and then take these little bits of scrap yarn and put the scrap yarn on the first and last stitch of the row. And then knitted a couple more inches and attached a little bit of scrap yarn the first and last stitch of the row. And I did that all the way up the sleeve. And the reason for that is when it comes to seaming, it's going to make it really easy to make sure I'm on track and matching things up. You see there? This has to match here because these are actually part of the same row. So I know I'm on track there. And again, and I can just put my clips in at these points to make sure I'm on track. Okay, and the last thing I want to show you has to do with the actual seaming part in something that didn't show up on the bulky sample but will show up in your real work. I'm just going to start in the middle here at an easy spot where I can see what I'm doing. Okay, I'm just doing the basic seaming just like I showed you. Just on a much smaller scale here. And with the wrong color of yarn, you'll want to seam. You will not want to use a different color of yarn to seam with. I just want to get some of this done so I can show you one little last trick you need to do after you pull it tight. Okay, that should be enough. I always do 1.5 inches or 2 inches or so and then pull it tight like this. And when you do that, oh, this did not stick. There we go. There's my example. When you pull it tight, it's awesome and magic and the seam disappears and it just looks perfect, but it will bunch. It'll bunch up a little bit like this, and if you aren't careful, you'll end up with bunched seams, which won't look good. So after you pull it tight, stretch it back out again. Your seam will still stay disappeared. It'll look good, but it'll keep you from getting bunched seams. And you'll want to do that on every seam of the sweater. Next up, we're going to talk about easing in the sleeves or setting in the sleeves. Something I didn't mention in the last part of the video that I should have, and it's in the pattern, is you will have a much more successful time with seaming if you steam first. And that's one of the reasons we're on this blocking board today. What I recommend is taking each knitted piece and putting it either on an ironing board or a bed or something that you can pin into, and pin it out to the measurements. That's measurements in the pattern for your size, and then use a steam iron or a proper steamer. And without pressing down, just with the iron, just keep pressing the steam button so steam billows out, and that will give you nice flat pieces to work with in the right size. Then once the whole thing is seamed together, you can do a wet block, meaning putting it in a sink full of water with wool wash, but that's how you do a normal wet block. You don't want to use any kind of soap on this sweater until after it's dyed. Something I learned from Doug, who's the dyeing expert we'll be working with in the second half of this video, is the second half of the tutorial is don't use any soap on the sweater, because the soap can actually make the dye not take in certain areas. Okay, setting in the sleeves. Let's go ahead and take a look. Here is a sweater that is mostly seamed up at this point, okay? And what I want to show you most specifically is, here is a shoulder seam, and then here is the neck sewn to the, the collar sewn to the back of the neck right here. And I've got this little marker here, and over here on this side, I have the shoulder seamed, and this is the little flap sticking up, and it will fold around and seam to the back of the neck as well. Okay, but we are most interested in the sleeve right now. And I have this sleeve all set in already, and it looks good, and it fits around a shoulder. And the reason this is the most complicated is, unlike the bind-off seam at the shoulder or the side seams, we aren't seaming bind-off to bind-off or side to side. We're seaming at funny, weird angles when we set in the sleeves. And that's why it's called easing in the sleeves, because it's really just a series of just adjusting and seeing where you are, and it isn't as straightforward as the rest of seaming. So here I have the armholes. Okay, you see where I am there? And here is my sleeve piece. And the first thing I'm going to do, this is the top, this is the bind-off row of my sleeve piece, is I'll fold that in half and find the very center of that spot in half, and then take a clipping marker. I use clipping markers like crazy for everything, but they're really awesome to have for this. So I just marked the very center of the bind-off row with the clipping marker, and here I am at my shoulder seam. I'm going to clip that right to the center of the shoulder seam. So there is one place we know has to match. The other couple of places we know have to match are the very edge here, right before the decreases in the shoulder cap, and the first decreases in the underarm. And if you are familiar with sewing patterns, this is going to make a lot of sense to you. And then the decreases all match up. These stair-steppy decreases all match up one for one. And so we can match that up very easily and put in a clipping marker. Okay, this is the part where we want to pay a little more attention, because things aren't as straightforward anymore. We want to match up this edge, which is shaped like this, with this edge, which is straight. And the first thing that I always do is just start pinching it together and see where you are. Things are matching up pretty well already, and I just want to even it out as much as possible. Because it isn't one for one, there will be places where we skip a stitch or grab half of a stitch or something to make it even, and you want to have these clipping markers put in so that you're on track with the seam matching up between the two things. So the two halves. I have evened all this out and evened all this out, so that's a good spot to mark. This actually ends up being one for one this is row to row here. That's easy. And so the part we want to concern ourselves with is matching up this. And that looks good. Okay. I'll get you started on this. I'm going to use this ridiculous green yarn again. Take out this first clippy marker. I've got my center marked there. So I'll attach this yarn just like I did before and attach it over here as well. Now to get started, I am going to go 1 for 1. I'm going to pick up, this is a bind off row, so I pick up both legs of the V over here and then jump over here, and this is the side of the work, and so I'll skip the first column of V's and pick up the 2 legs over here. I'm just going to do this 1 for 1 for a couple of stitches to get myself started, and then I'll start paying attention to how the 2 halves are matching up. Okay. So when you're doing this, don't rush through this. Keep checking your work. If something doesn't look right, you can take that stitch out and redo it. I actually just skipped a stitch down here in the sleeve cap because it looked like I needed to get things matching up. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that tightly and then loosen it up again. That looks good. We're still matching up well to hit that marker the way it should be. I'm going to skip half a stitch here and grab kind of across this long ways there, just because I'm feeling that I'm ending up with extra fabric here. Wow, that's looking really good. I also like the fact that you can't see the green yarn, and I'm matching right up here. Now once I get past this clippy marker, it starts to get easier, matching up 1 for 1, and then from here to here it absolutely matches up 1 for 1, and all the little stair step decreases, that all matches up 1 for 1 as well. So the really tricky part is going to be this top here. Oh, something I just started doing without explaining is I always start seaming the armholes at the shoulder and go down one way, and at the shoulder and go down the other way. And that's because I want things to be the very smoothest at the top of the shoulder. If there's going to be any problem with the shoulder easing in, I want to be able to absorb that down here somewhere and not where I want the, I don't want anything to show bumpy or anything right here. Now the fact of the matter is if something was bumpy, I would take out the seam and redo it, but I guess it's just a habit I'm in. Starting here and going down, and starting here and going down. And then once the sleeve is set in, you'll seam from the cuff of the sleeve all the way down to the hip area of the sweater, the bottom cuff. Okay, next up we're going to be on location with Doug Upchurch of White Bear Fiber Studios. We'll be in his studio so he can show us how to do the ombre effect dyeing.